Space Travel Break Episode 3, brought to you by the Deep Space Travel Network. Find your next destination with DSTN at deepspacetravelnetwork.com. That's deep-space-travel-network.com. A little bit of housekeeping. Thank you so much to all of you new subscribers. I can't believe the responses I've been getting to my content, and it genuinely encourages me to keep going and keep improving. You may notice that the mic sounds a little bit better this week. I'm always trying to improve audio quality and quality of content, and I hope to keep improving it. If you're enjoying this content and you enjoy this episode in particular, please leave a like. It's honestly the best way to let me know that you like what I'm doing, and it really, really helps the channel keep growing, which is always encouraging for me. So thank you so much for your support, and let's get to the news. So, this week in No Man's Sky news, we have, drumroll, nothing. Nothing so far. But that's okay, because we still have a podcast to do. So let's get straight to the topic of the week. We're looking for clues in-game as to what frontiers may hold. And I mean, hopefully this podcast releases before Frontiers does. Otherwise, this will probably look pretty dumb. But even if it is, it's fun to speculate, right? So, with the big Frontiers update just around the corner, and no evidence whatsoever to go on, I'm going to see if I can extrapolate a little bit based on what's currently in the game. So, fair warning, I will be stretching the limits of logic and imagination in this speculation. But it's all in good fun, so, obviously don't take this as a serious prediction or expectation. It's always good to keep your expectations in check with these updates. Expect nothing, and you will be pleasantly surprised. I can promise you that. Also, possible spoiler alert for all kinds of things. I'm going to be talking about, all kinds of things. So, alright, let's go. So, I thought I'd start by explaining what exactly I mean by clues, right? I mean, I'm sure you know what a clue is, but what I mean by it in the context of this podcast. So Hello Games often, they iterate on what they've added to the game. They'll upgrade things, they'll polish things, they'll replace things. That happens all the time. It's happened for the last 5 years. But sometimes they do add things that are like obviously placeholders or unfinished work, and they do that, with the idea and the plan to go back and fix it later. And so, some examples of this previously that we can look at are the portals, which we saw them in the pre-release trailers functional. When the game released, the portals were in the game, but you couldn't activate them. They didn't have any use or function. And they did eventually, in Atlas Rises, activate those portals and give them the ability they were supposed to have. But that was an example of like a clue as to what a future feature of the game would be. Another one of those would be, for example, the multiplayer orbs that they added in Atlas Rises, right? So we knew that wasn't going to be the final. Well, I didn't know at the time, but you could extrapolate that wasn't their final idea for multiplayer. They even said this is the first step towards synchronous multiplayer in No Man's Sky. Another less obvious one, perhaps, were the oceans in the Next update. So Next, revamped the entire universe and gave us all kinds of new content. But the oceans were surprisingly empty. Whereas previously there'd been like a whole ocean, like coral biome. When Next released, all the oceans were suspiciously empty, just a few rocks and plants and barely any wildlife. And of course, just a couple months later, the Abyss update came out and completely regenerated all of the oceans with new assets and new gameplay features. So that's something we can look at things like that. Another example with Beyond, right? They had a blank terminal in the space station in the back where all of the blueprint people are. And that was eventually just in this last update, in this last year, they added a recipes station to it. And so we can look at examples like this and see where they've sort of put something in and it's either has no functionality or very basic functionality. And then later they go back and fully integrate it into the game. And these are the kinds of clues I want to look for this week and see if maybe they'll give us a hint as to what to expect in Frontiers. Alright, so let's start the search for clues with probably the most obvious one, which is the new space station cores that they added in No Man's Sky Prisms. So they just added these in the last update. It replaces the dark core of the space station that had been there since launch. They replaced it with a big, artificial intelligence suspended in a large chamber. And there's also a panel there that allows you to interact with the space station core. Now, you can't do anything with it right now. It has like a single generic text box. But there's a grayed out option for using a space station override, an AI master key. And this has been data mined to exist. And we know they're planning to do something with it. But obviously, that isn't the case. A lot of people speculated that, at the end of Expedition 3, which we were expecting in July, that we would get some kind of a space station override key, and that would lead us to the Frontiers update. But, of course, that didn't happen. So what do I think this means? Well, I think it opens up a lot of interesting possibilities. The most obvious of which would be, the ability to possibly own a space station. And this could manifest in a number of ways, right? It could be like a freighter where you have, one space station and that's like your home station. And maybe you can customize it. Maybe you can hire NPCs or customize which vendors you have, rearrange things, decorate it. That would be really cool. And that's sort of like the most obvious idea for that. Another idea is that it could be similar to frigates or to home bases where you can have multiple. So as you cross the galaxy, you're claiming these space stations, and perhaps you can build like a network of some kind that can either help you travel more easily or build a grid or map a region of space. It could be something like that, which would be really cool. It could also tie into some kind of faction gameplay that some people have been speculating about in Frontiers. Honestly, all of that stuff sounds really cool, but the thing that gets me most excited is the idea that it might be tied to a complete space station redesign. So, yes, they replaced one part of it, but it's possible that with Frontiers, the entire space station is rebuilt, right? So, space stations stayed they looked the same pretty much all the way through No Man's Sky Next, in which they were sort of expanded a little bit. But the overall layout's still the same, right? You have the long runway in the middle, and then you have shops and rooms on either side. And what I would love to see personally is to have these. Obviously, people are speculating about cities. One way that could make it into the game would be to have space stations function as cities, right? So, similar to the Anomaly, you would have large interior spaces that wouldn't require, all the assets of a planet. So you could load that even on last generation consoles. That would be a really cool way to include cities, and possibly having a station override would maybe put you in charge of that city, and it could be like your home city. Who knows, right? Unlimited possibilities. It could also be a way of earning passive income, right? So maybe once you own the station, you collect, a small amount of profits from people docking and refueling. Any of these possibilities sound really cool to me. I would love if all of them were added, but let me know what you think below, what you think the space station cores will be used for in the future. Maybe we can restrict access, right? Have a private space station. Not sure really what the point of that would be, but maybe if you're in like a very famous system, right? You can charge people to dock. Who knows? Another area of the game that people have been speculating about for years is the blank vendor stall on the space anomaly. So, if you head up to the market area, past Helios, and you look just to the right of Ares and Cronus, you'll see a vendor stall that is currently sitting empty, right? It's got a hologram of a couple of arrows pointing to it. A lot of people speculated this would have been ship customization. Some people were thinking maybe they would have like Nexus races, as in like spaceship races or exocraft races, or things of that sort. And so far they haven't added anything to it. It's been blank since 2019 when the Nexus was introduced. And as we've seen, previously with the manufacturing recipe terminal that was added this year, that Hello Games is still intent on adding things to the Nexus. In fact, another example would be the gene sequencer that they added next to Kronos over here, which was added with the Companions update. So it would be really great to see another vendor added here. It could be in a completely new branch of gameplay. It could simply be new lore. Perhaps it's even something as simple as adding like the equivalent of a trade terminal, right? Having someone that you can just buy and sell items from in the anomaly. I think that would be really useful for selling rewards that you get from Nexus missions. But let me know what you think below. Do you think they're ever going to fill this in, or is it meant to show that, the anomaly always has space to grow? Who knows? But I personally would love to see a new vendor here. I always love to see new life in the Nexus. The space anomaly is just full of possibilities, and something that really captures the imagination of a lot of speculators are the locked doors that you find throughout the anomaly. So previously, and prior to the Beyond update, when the space anomaly was much smaller, it originally had locked doors, and it was just a single room, right? You would go in and speak to Nada and Polo, and eventually they added, they unlocked the doors and added the Quicksilver synthesis companion, and also the Korvax simulation, which is still present in the anomaly. But now with this new anomaly, we have a lot more space, but there are still 3 locked doors. 2 of these doors are located in Nada and Polo's office, or control room. I don't think these will ever open. I think they're purely aesthetic, but you never know, right? They could lead somewhere. But the one that most people speculate about, and the one that I think is most likely to open at some point, is the large door at the back of the space anomaly. So this is something people noticed day one, and it looks like not that they necessarily had an idea in mind, but that they wanted to leave it wide open, just in case they wanted to connect a huge new part of the anomaly. But what could this be, right? Could it just be more rooms, new vendors? It could be a racetrack, for people to practice exocraft races. It could be sports. It could be a city environment, right? Maybe the way they add cities is, since the lore says, the Sentinels prevent cities from growing, maybe the idea is that since the anomaly is between space and time, that the travelers were able to build a city here. I mean, that would be something really cool. Imagine, player-owned spaces. Yeah, that would be really cool. It could honestly be anything. But I would love to see something added to the anomaly in the Frontiers update. Just to keep it fresh and feel like it's growing, especially with all the new gameplay features they've been adding. Sticking to the Nexus for this next one, we have, a couple of NPCs, but most notably Ariadne, the pink alien. So if you ever visit Ariadne and the space anomaly and you just go to talk to them, they won't say much, right? You get a single dialogue box and that's it. And for those of you who didn't take part in the weekend missions of 2020 or are new to the game, there was an entire quest line, a whole season of events that took place every weekend. And it was this one continuous story about the Abyss, which is a sort of like a big malevolent force in the No Man's Sky universe. It's not really clear what it is. It's able to influence the minds of creatures. It's able to infect things. And it tends to transfer through water and liquids and things of that sort. And so in this campaign, various members of the anomaly would go missing at certain points, and they would come back, and you would find out what they were doing. You would suspect some of helping the Abyss or possibly betraying us. And at the end of all that, it turns out that Ariadne was either replaced by a doppelganger or brainwashed in some way by the Abyss. So the Ariadne we see here, as far as people know, isn't like the friendly Ariadne. It's an agent of the Abyss, right? And so they didn't really expand upon that. We were kind of hoping they would in the Origins update, since those weekend missions led up to that. But we haven't heard anything more about the Abyss or the true fate of Ariadne since then. So if this upcoming update has, lore or story, perhaps it'll pick up where this one left off. We'll find out the fate of Ariadne. So before we leave the anomaly, 2 quick notes. One of them is another NPC that doesn't say much is Tethys. But Tethys, by their personality, is a little bit withdrawn. They keep to themselves. That's not necessarily, pointing to anything, but I thought I'd mention it. We also have this podium in front of the large teleporter in the space anomaly. And this podium looks like it would have some kind of control panel, possibly similar to the control panels that you see in front of regular portals on planets. But this one doesn't have any function at all. And maybe it was something that they decided, they no longer needed that function, and they removed it and just left the podium since it was part of the architecture. Or maybe they're going to find some future use for it. But I thought it was interesting nonetheless. So this next clue is something that I'm really passionate about, but I'm probably reaching a little bit too far. So if you look at the giant archive buildings that they added in the Origins update last year, I think there is a lot of possibility, a lot of opportunity for them to expand. So we can tell since Desolation that they have the technology and the ability to create more advanced and more intricate procedural environments, right? And if you look at the buildings themselves, the tower part of the archives, those are quite procedural. You've got a number of different bases and parts that can be stacked and built on top, different styles. And if you look at the bottom part with the landing pads, that's also somewhat procedural. There are only a couple of different configurations right now, but I believe that they could add more in the future if they wanted to. But even if they didn't, I still believe that the way it's set up now lends itself to more procedural generation. So you have these little tunnels underneath the landing pads, and depending on the configuration, there's a different number, but they're basically empty. And they've shown that they can put these little, artifact vaults down here, but they could realistically add all kinds of things down there. You could add different terminals, you could add just lootable containers, secret NPCs, all kinds of stuff. Additionally, if you go topside to the main thoroughfare, you'll see a technology vendor and a guild envoy, as well as a trade terminal and artifact vaults and a planetary chart. What's interesting is that you could take these and you could remix different vendors into these, right? So the guild envoy is a bit of an odd choice for this. They don't seem to fit very well. They don't do anything that the ones in the space station don't do. It's just an extra guild interaction, I suppose. It would be cool if these guild envoys offered, special missions on this planet specifically. And I say that because, once you reach a certain point with the guilds, when you speak to the envoy, they just give you a gift, which is really cool. I appreciate that. But sometimes it would be nice to, do an actual task for them, even as a late game player. And if one thing I've noticed about the archives is that, obviously based on their name, they're very focused on history, paleontology, archaeology, all that sort of stuff, right? They have artifact vaults so that you can store relics and things like that. They have the actual archive, which contains, a recorded history of that race. They have the planetary chart, which if you interact with it, right now it only has a single interaction. So you can purchase a chart of that specific planet that will lead you to a ruined point of interest, which I think is really fascinating because it reminds me a lot of the space station cartographers when they were just added, how you could only purchase a single random map. And then later on they expanded that to being able to purchase specific charts from him. So I'm hoping they expand this little planetary chart terminal to point to possibly a procedural dungeon of some sort on planets. And this is where my speculation goes way out of hand, because if you look at the archaeological theme of these archives, it seems to imply that you go there, you take one of these charts, they lead you to a ruin, you dig up whatever's in the ruin, you come back and you trade it through one of those artifact vaults for something of higher quality, right? Or higher value. So in a sense, it has this whole little gameplay loop where you can be an archaeologist just by interacting with this one station. And I feel like they could really further improve that with adding unique points of interest to a planet that you can only locate using a chart from one of these planetary archives. So even at the space station, they wouldn't have it, right? You'd have to find an archive on that planet. And I think that would give them more of a purpose. Or alternatively, you could, swap out some of the vendors. So depending on which archive you go to, it might have, maybe an exocraft upgrade vendor or someone else, someone you wouldn't expect to see, maybe a black market dealer. And that would also give you another reason to explore different archives and stop by, maybe even new vendor types that aren't available at space stations for one reason or another. That would be something great. But let me know what you think. Do you think these archives are pretty much finished and that's all they're going to do with them? Or do you think it's more of a building block, something that they plan to improve and expand later? I would love to hear your thoughts. Now a couple of quick ones. One of these is basalt. So this is a new raw element that they added in the Origins update. You can find it on volcanic planets. And it's sometimes listed when you scan a planet from space, but for a while it wasn't. And basalt, you can't do anything with it. It's not used in any recipes, it's not used to charge anything, it's not used in any blueprints to build anything, right? It's completely useless. So I estimate that they added it for a reason. That maybe they're planning to include new buildable items that are maybe volcanic based that you can use basalt for, or there's going to be a new technology or recipe that you'll need to recharge with basalt. Who knows? But it does imply that they're planning to use it for something in the future. Next we have the incinerator, which was a multi-tool technology that was added in the Desolation update, and it's essentially a flamethrower. Now this was added to Desolation and it was removed, I want to say a week after release. You could never purchase the blueprint, but you could in certain cases find multi-tools with it already installed. And so if you're lucky enough to get one of those, some people say you can still use it. And it functioned like a flamethrower, right? It had flame animations, a custom aiming reticule, but they never added it to the game. We all assumed that they took it out because it wasn't ready and that it would be added in the Origins update, but it never was. In fact, it still to this day has not been added. Now, some people have noted that they've been making slight changes to it, updating it, which implies that they're still developing it and they're hopefully going to add it to the game in the future, but you never know. There might have been some problem with it that just completely broke the game that they haven't been able to solve. But personally, I would love to see it. I think it would be a great addition to fighting not just little creatures in the Desolation Freighters, but also the biological horrors that you meet on planets, right? Great crowd control, and I think it'd be a lot of fun to have a flamethrower in the game. Now, the last thing I want to cover is Expedition 3. So we expected Expedition 3 to release prior to the big anniversary update. However, it didn't. So it's possible this may appear alongside the new update, or it might actually still lead to the update if they release it first. Or alternatively, they could release it afterwards. However, it's all but confirmed that we are getting an Expedition 3. Now, some milestones were data mined a while back. If you want to take a look at those on screen right now, this image is via Procedural Traveler on Twitter. I've linked to it in the description below. I won't cover these in any detail, but if you take a look, they don't really mention any new gameplay features, right? They're not saying something like, purchase your first space station or anything that would spoil a new feature. But they are notably focused on exploration and discovery, which I think could lean into the theme of this next update, which is, along with the name Frontiers, implies discovering new things. And some of the milestones are encrypted, so those could include new features or teases for new features. It could also be another crossover event, much like the Mass Effect one. Who knows? At this point, we don't really have enough information to go on, but I do think it's something to look at and speculate on. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you're excited for Expedition 3, do you think it'll come first? Do you think they will have a lead up to the Frontiers with the Expedition, or do you think it's just gonna release alongside it, similar to the Expeditions update and Expedition 1? I personally have no idea. But whatever it is, I'm excited for it. I personally love exploration-focused gameplay, so if all they ask us to do is explore some caves and log a few creatures, I will be a happy camper. So, those are just some of the clues that I was able to find while preparing for this podcast. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you found other clues that you think, other features that should be fleshed out, or other things that look, unfinished that possibly will be completed in this update. I would love to hear it. I'm sure I missed something, but the game is so big, and it's a lot of fun just to speculate and think about, what could be happening. And then, of course, it's always fun to look back after the update releases and be like, wow, none of us saw that coming, or wow, I actually guessed it. But until then, I have a community spotlight. So, if in case you missed this, which hopefully you didn't, but in case you did, Sword, a YouTuber, he organized this amazing podcast last Saturday that gathered a whole bunch of the biggest names in No Man's Sky content creation. And he just interviewed them and talked about Frontiers, talked about how they started their careers, talked about all kinds of things, right? Celebrating 5 years of No Man's Sky. And it's a 5-hour podcast, but I have to say, I listened to the whole thing, and honestly, I think it's worth giving a listen. It's really great stuff, really interesting, a lot of fun. Sword is a great guy to listen to, real positive. And if you have a chance, I put the link in the description below. Give it a listen, give it a like, and give him a subscribe, if you're interested in seeing more stuff like that. I really enjoyed it. I wasn't expecting it. I wish I could have caught it live, but I was busy that Saturday. But if you're looking for more content to tide you over till Frontiers, you can't ask for better stuff to just put in the background and work too. So that's my community spotlight this week. All right, well, that's this week's show. It was a little bit different. I recorded it differently. As you may have noticed, I used B-roll versus actually recording it live in-game. And that was just to make the recording process a little bit easier. And also the mic I'm using I previously recorded it on my PS5 controller's mic, which, yeah, I know. But this week I have a little USB mic, and so it's a little bit easier for me to record the gameplay and the dialogue, or monologue in this case, separately. So let me know what you thought of this format. Let me know if the audio quality was a little bit better this week. And I hope to keep improving it as I continue to figure things out. So thanks again so much for your support. You guys have been really encouraging, and it makes it a lot easier to make time to put this content together. And I hope to keep doing it because honestly, I'm really enjoying it. So thanks again. Leave a like if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe if you want to see more. I sound like a YouTuber. And have a good one.